The Salish Sea does not forgive. It is a vast, grayscale expanse of shifting tides and bone-deep cold, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is drawn in temperature, not time. The water here sits at a hypothermic 48 degrees Fahrenheit, even in the height of summer. It is beautiful, certainly. The jagged pines of the San Juan Islands slice into the fog like teeth, and the air smells of salt and ancient decay. But it is a beauty that demands respect, and usually it punishes those who look away for even a second. On a Tuesday in late August, the Miller family looked away. They were not reckless people. They were not inexperienced. They were simply human, caught in the mundane distraction of a stuck zipper and a spilled soda, while the ocean waited just beneath the gunnel. When 6-year-old Leo Miller went over the side of their 20-foot recreational cruiser, there was no splash heard over the drone of the outboard motor. There was no scream. The sea simply opened up, swallowed him, and sealed itself shut again. What happened next should have been a tragedy. It should have been a recovery mission for a small, frozen body. Instead, it became something else entirely. It became a mystery that baffled marine biologists, terrified the Coast Guard, and challenged our fundamental understanding of the apex predators of the ocean. Because Leo didn't drown. He didn't freeze. He was found floating in the center of a churning, breathing geometric shape made of 6 tons of muscle and instinct. The killer whales didn't eat him. They didn't ignore him. They claimed him. If you want to uncover the dark, strange realities of the natural world, and the true stories that sound like fiction, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are diving deep today into cold waters and strange behaviors. You won't want to miss what comes next. The day began with the kind of deceptive serenity that locals in the Pacific Northwest know better than to trust. The sky was a bruised purple that promised to burn off into a clear blue, but the fog clung stubbornly to the water's surface, a thick white blanket hovering 3 feet above the waves. David Miller, a 40-year-old architect from Seattle, was at the helm of the Lady J. He was a man who prided himself on preparation. He had checked the tides, the currents, and the weather report. He had double-checked the fuel lines and the radio. His wife, Sarah, was in the stern, organizing a cooler full of sandwiches and juice boxes, trying to keep the damp morning air from seeping into their lunch. And Leo, their son, was bouncing on the balls of his feet near the gunnel, wearing a bright orange life vest that looked 2 sizes too big for his slender frame. The narrative of a disaster is rarely written in bold strokes. It is written in the margins. It is written in the small, seemingly inconsequential decisions. David decided to push the throttle forward just a hair, trying to outrun the lingering fog bank and reach the clearer waters near Orcas Island. Sarah decided to look down for 10 seconds to wipe up a juice spill that threatened to stain the deck upholstery. Leo decided to lean over the side to look at a piece of kelp drifting by, mesmerized by the way the amber bulb bobbed in the wake. The boat hit a rogue wake, not a massive wave, just a sudden jarring lateral shift caused by a passing ferry miles away. The Lady J shuddered. The cooler slid. Sarah cursed softly, grabbing for the napkins. David corrected the wheel, his knuckles white for a split second as he stabilized the hull. "All right back there?" David called out, his voice fighting the wind. "Fine," Sarah yelled back, scrubbing at the carpet. "Just a mess." "Leo, sit down, honey." She didn't look up when she said it. She assumed he was there. She assumed the orange vest was still a bright spot in her peripheral vision. It wasn't until she threw the soiled napkins into the trash bag and straightened her spine that the silence hit her. It wasn't a silence of noise. The engine was still roaring, the wind was still rushing, but a silence of presence. The space where her son had been standing was empty. The fiberglass bench was wet with spray, but it was vacant. "Leo?" she said. It wasn't a scream yet. It was a question. She scanned the small deck. She looked into the small cabin. Leo? David turned his head, a grin starting to form, expecting a game of hide and seek. Where's the little guy? Sarah's eyes went to the water. The wake behind them was a frothing white scar on the gray ocean, stretching back hundreds of yards into the mist. The realization hit her with the physical force of a blow to the stomach. Her knees buckled. David! The scream tore from her throat, raw and jagged. He's gone. David? He's gone. David killed the throttle instantly. The bow of the Lady J dipped violently as the momentum died, water sloshing over the front. What? He's not here. He fell. Turn around. Oh God, turn around. The next 5 minutes were a chaotic blur of panic and procedure. David spun the wheel hard to port, swinging the boat around in a tight, aggressive arc. He screamed into the radio, broadcasting a mayday on Channel 16, his voice cracking as he gave their coordinates. But coordinates in the ocean are fluid things. The water moves. The boat moves. The person in the water moves. And the fog, which had seemed manageable minutes ago, now felt like a malice, a white wall hiding the only thing that mattered in the world. Leo had been in the water for perhaps 3 minutes by the time the Lady J completed its turn and began to retrace its wake. 3 minutes in 48-degree water triggers the cold shock response. The body involuntarily gasps. If the head is underwater, that gasp draws in liquid instead of air. Leo was wearing a life jacket, which kept his head up, but the shock of the cold would have been agonizing. It feels like burning. It feels like the skin is being stripped away. A 6-year-old child has less body mass, less insulation. The clock wasn't ticking. It was sprinting. David stood at the helm, scanning the water, his eyes stinging with tears and wind. Sarah was on the bow, leaning precariously over the rail, screaming her son's name. Leo! Leo! Baby! Answer me! The ocean offered nothing but the sound of waves slapping against the hull. They motored slowly, terrified of running him over with the prop, terrified of going too fast, terrified of going too slow. Every piece of driftwood looked like an orange vest. Every clump of kelp looked like hair. Then Sarah saw it. A flash of unnatural color in the monochrome world. Orange. There, David, there. 2 o'clock. I see him. David gunned the engine, then pulled back, drifting toward the spot Sarah was pointing at. It was about 200 yards away. The orange speck bobbed in the swell. It was him. He was motionless, his head lolling back against the collar of the vest, his small arms floating uselessly at his sides. He's not moving, Sarah sobbed, her hands gripping the rail so hard her fingernails threatened to snap. Why isn't he moving? We're getting him, David growled, focused on the approach. Get the boat hook. Get the ladder down. They were 50 yards away when the water between them and the boy changed. It didn't ripple. It bulged. A massive oily black shape broke the surface with the sound of a pressurized release. Poof. A spout of mist shot 10 feet into the air. Then another. Then a third. The dorsal fin rose like a scythe, tall, black, and unmistakable. It stood nearly 6 feet high, wobbling slightly at the tip, the sign of a massive male. Whales, David whispered, a different kind of fear seizing his chest. Orcas. In the Pacific Northwest, orcas are icons. They are painted on murals, printed on postcards, and revered as the guardians of the Salish Sea. But out here, in the open water, when your child is bobbing helplessly among them, the romanticism evaporates. These are Orcas orca, killer whales. They are the ocean's most efficient hunters. They toss 500-pound seals into the air for sport. They coordinate attacks with military precision. And there are 2 types in these waters. Residents, who eat fish, and transients, or bigs, who eat mammals. Residents are generally smaller, chatty, and focused on salmon. Transients are silent hunters. They are larger, scarred, and lethal. the male that surfaced between the boat and the boy was silent. "Oh my God," Sarah screamed. "Get him! David, they're going to get him." David slammed the throttle forward, intending to cut between the whale and his son, but a second shape surfaced directly off the bow, forcing him to veer hard to starboard to avoid a collision. This second whale was smaller, likely a female, but she moved with terrifying speed. She didn't dive. She logged, resting on the surface, her massive body acting as a physical barricade. "They're blocking us," David yelled. "What are they doing?" The scene that unfolded over the next 60 seconds was a nightmare of confusion. More fins broke the surface. 3, then 4, then 5. They converged on the small orange spot floating in the gray water. Sarah was hysterical, screaming, throwing a fender cushion at the water, as if she could scare away a 6-ton predator with a piece of foam. "Don't hurt him. Please, don't hurt him." But the whales didn't strike. They didn't lunge. They didn't exhibit the violent, thrashing behavior of a hunt. Instead, they slowed down. They arranged themselves. The large male, the one with the towering dorsal fin, moved to the north of Leo. The female took the south. 2 others flanked east and west. They closed the distance until they were mere feet from the boy, their black bodies forming a tight, impenetrable ring. They began to swim, slowly at first, then picking up a rhythm. They swam in a counterclockwise circle around the drifting child, their movements synchronized. The water inside the circle began to calm, shielded from the chop of the open sea by the wall of moving bodies. David brought the Lady J as close as he dared, the engine idling. He was 30 yards away now. He could see Leo's face. The boy's eyes were closed. His skin was pale, a stark white against the orange vest. He looked like a doll discarded in a washing machine. "I'm going in," David said, stripping off his jacket. "I have to swim to him." "No," Sarah grabbed his arm. "David, look at them." "You can't," she pointed. The large male had broken the circle pattern for a split second. He turned his massive head toward the boat. His eye, a dark patch on the black skin, seemed to lock onto David. Then, the whale slapped his tail against the surface, a thunderous crack that sounded like a gunshot. It was a warning. Stay back. They're protecting him? David stammered, his mind unable to process the data. Or are they keeping him? The radio crackled to life, the Coast Guard operator's voice cutting through the wind. "Vessel Lady J, this is Sector Puget Sound. We have a chopper en route, ETA 10 minutes. We have a fast response boat 20 minutes out. What is your status?" David grabbed the mic, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "Sector Puget, this is Lady J. We have visual on the boy. He is ... He is surrounded by whales. Repeat, surrounded by killer whales. I can't get to him. They are blocking the boat." There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence that spoke volumes about how unprecedented this report was. "Say again, Lady J?" "The whales are blocking you." "Affirmative," David shouted. "There are 5 of them. They are circling him. I need immediate assistance. If I go in the water, I think they'll kill me." The circle tightened. The whales were so close to Leo now that their dorsal fins brushed the water inches from his life vest. The weight from their swimming created a strange localized current, keeping the boy centered, preventing him from drifting away, but also preventing him from drifting toward his parents. Sarah fell to her knees on the deck, her eyes fixed on her son. "Leo, wake up," she whispered, a prayer lost to the wind. "Please, baby, just move a finger." But Leo didn't move. And the whales kept swimming, a dark, rotating carousel of apex predators holding a 6-year-old boy hostage in the middle of the Salish Sea. The fog began to close in again, thickening, threatening to obscure the scene entirely. The drone of the approaching helicopter was still faint, miles away. For now, it was just the Miller family, the cold ocean, and the Guardians, who had decided that today the rules of nature would be rewritten. As David watched, he noticed something chilling. The large male wasn't just circling. He was vocalizing. A high-pitched, piercing whistle echoed through the hull of the boat, audible even above the water. It wasn't the click of echolocation. It was a call. And from the depths below, something answered. The water around the circle began to darken, as if a shadow was rising from the abyss to join the formation. The situation was escalating. The whales weren't just reacting to a buoy in the water. They were executing a plan. And the Miller family was terrified that the plan did not involve a rescue. To understand the terror of that moment, you have to understand the sheer scale of an orca. The male, likely a transient known to researchers as T-142, weighed approximately 11,000 pounds. His teeth were conical, interlocking, designed to crush bone and tear thick blubber. He was a machine built for violence. And he was inches away from a child who weighed 45 pounds soaking wet. David's hand hovered over the throttle. Every instinct as a father screamed at him to ram the boat into the circle, to drive the prop over the backs of the whales if he had to die trying to grab his son. But his instinct as a mariner told him the truth. The moment he engaged the gear, the whales would react. They could capsize the 20-foot boat with a single coordinated wave. They could ram the hull and shatter the fiberglass. If he went into the water now, he would leave Sarah alone on a sinking vessel while he was torn apart. He was paralyzed. The most powerful force in his life, his love for his son, was gridlocked against the most powerful force in nature. "They're getting closer to him, David," Sarah moaned. "The big one. He's nudging him." It was true. T-142 had tightened his orbit. As he passed Leo, his flank brushed against the boy's legs. The contact caused Leo's small body to rotate in the water. To Sarah, it looked like a nudge before a bite. It looked like the way a cat toys with a mouse. "Coast Guard, where are you?" David screamed into the mic. "5 minutes out, Lady J," came the reply, calm and robotic. "Keep visual contact. Do not enter the water. I repeat, do not enter the water. He's going to die of hypothermia before you get here. Sir, if you enter the water with aggressive wildlife, we will have 2 casualties. Hold your position." The wind picked up, whipping the tops of the waves into whitecaps. The sea was getting rougher. The calm pool inside the whale circle was the only stable water for miles. It defied physics. The whales were using their bodies to create a breakwater for the child. Was it intentional? Or was it just a byproduct of their formation? Leo's head slumped forward, his chin hitting the water. Sarah gasped. If his face went under, he would drown in seconds, life jacket or not. The female whale, the one acting as the southern law, saw it too, or sensed it. She did something that made David's blood run cold. She stopped swimming. She turned inward, toward the center of the circle. She submerged slightly, her blowhole disappearing, and glided beneath the boy. "No," Sarah shrieked. "She's taking him under," the water churned. The orange vest disappeared for a heartbeat. David gripped the wheel, ready to ram. But the vest didn't vanish into the deep. It rose. The female orca rose slowly, her massive, slick black back breaking the surface. And there, resting on the slippery curve of her spine, just behind the blowhole, was Leo. She had lifted him out of the freezing water. She was holding him up. The boy rolled precariously on the whale's back, limp and unconscious. The whale adjusted her buoyancy, stabilizing herself to keep him from sliding off. She exhaled, a blast of mist spraying over Leo's face. David and Sarah stood frozen, their mouths open, their minds unable to comprehend the image before them. A killer whale was serving as a life raft for their son. "Are you seeing this?" David whispered to the air. "Are you seeing this?" But the relief was short-lived, because as the female held Leo up, the male, T-142 turned toward the lady. He didn't slap his tail this time. He charged. He came straight for the boat, a torpedo of black muscle, creating a bow wave that looked like a tsunami to the terrified parents. He wasn't attacking the boat to sink it. He was pushing it back. He was enforcing a perimeter. He veered off at the last second, sending a wall of water over the gunwale that drenched David and Sarah. The message was clear. This is our boy now. You are not welcome here. The helicopter finally broke through the cloud layer, its rotors thumping a rhythm of salvation against the sky. But down on the water, the standoff was absolute. The parents wanted their child. The rescuers were arriving. But the whales held the center, and they showed no sign of letting go. As the Coast Guard swimmer prepared to drop from the hovering helicopter looking down at a sea full of fins and teeth, the situation shifted from a rescue to a negotiation with a species that spoke a language we had forgotten how to hear. The boy was out of the water, yes, but he was on the back of a predator that could dive to 300 feet in a heartbeat. And she was moving. The circle began to drift. The whales were taking him away. The physics of a nightmare are different from the physics of reality. In a nightmare, distance stretches. You run but never move. You reach but never touch. For David and Sarah Miller, the Salish Sea had become a nightmare manifest. The pod of Transient Killer Whales was moving, and they were taking Leo with them. It wasn't a drift. It was a purposeful, hydrodynamic migration. The female orca, the one supporting Leo's unconscious body on her slick black back, was propelling herself forward with gentle, undulating strokes of her massive flukes. She was careful, agonizingly careful, keeping her dorsal surface above the chop, acting as a living stretcher. But she was fast. Even at a fraction of her top speed, she was outpacing the idle drift of the Lady J. The distance between the parents and their son opened up 30 yards, then 40, then 50. The fog swirled in the gap, a gray curtain trying to bring the final act down before the rescue could even begin. David slammed the throttle forward, the engine screaming as the prop bit into the water. He didn't care about the wake anymore. He didn't care about the hull. He steered the boat on a parallel course, flanking the pod, terrified that if he fell behind, the fog would swallow the whales and he would never see his son again. To his right, the massive male, T-142, matched his speed. The whale was swimming on its side, one pectoral fin raised like a blackened blade, his eye fixed on the boat. It was an escort, and it was a threat. "Keep your distance," the animal was saying. "We are moving." High above, the thumping rhythm of the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter grew from a distant hum to a deafening roar. The orange bird banked sharply out of the cloud cover, its rotors whipping the mist into violent spirals. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Commander Eric Thorne fought the controls. Flying low over water is dangerous. Flying low over unpredictable biological assets is a recipe for disaster. "Visual contact," Thorne said, his voice tight over the combs. "I see the pod. I see. My God, I see the boy. He's on the whale." "Confirm he is on the whale." In the back of the cabin, aviation survival technician Mick O'Connell was already hooked into the hoist. Mick was 28 years old, a man built of lean muscle and calm nerves, trained to jump into hurricanes and burning trawlers. He had pulled corpses out of the Bering Sea and pulled terrified fishermen off sinking skiffs in the dead of night. He thought he had seen everything the ocean could throw at a human being. He was wrong. Looking down through the open door, past his fins, he saw the black shapes moving through the dark water like ink spills. He saw the small orange vest, shockingly bright against the obsidian skin of the predator. "Pilot, swimmer," Mick said, checking his harness. "What's the play?" "If I go down there, I'm jumping into a blender. We can't use the basket directly." The flight mechanic shouted over the intercom. "The roto-wash will freak the animals out. They might dive." If that female dives, the kid is gone. I have to go in, Mick said. Drop me 50 feet ahead of them. Let them come to me. It's the only way. It was a gamble of insane proportions. To drop a human being into the path of a traveling pod of killer whales mammals, known to kill great white sharks, was contrary to every safety protocol in the manual. But the manual didn't cover child abducted by cetaceans. The manual assumed the ocean was empty, or at least indifferent. This ocean was alive, and it was possessive. Copy that, swimmer, the pilot said. Dropping you at 12 o'clock, 50 yards. You've got maybe 3 minutes before hypothermia makes you useless, even in the dry suit. Get in, grab the package, and get out. The helicopter flared, hovering over a patch of open water ahead of the moving pod. The winch whined. Mech stepped off the skid. For a second, he hung suspended between the gray sky and the gray water, a fragile human pendulum. Then he was in. The cold hit him like a physical blow, punching through the neoprene of his dry suit. The water was 48 degrees cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs and the dexterity from your fingers. Mick purged his snorkel, oriented himself, and looked up. The scene underwater was terrifyingly clear. The visibility was about 30 feet. Out of the gloom they came. They looked like submarines. The size of them was impossible to comprehend from the surface. Underwater, they were titans. Mick saw the white eye patches glowing in the murky light. He saw the scars on their flanks, white scratches from the teeth of other whales, the violent history of their lives written on their skin. They were coming straight for him. Mick floated, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. He didn't thrash. He didn't swim toward them. He waited. The lead female, the one carrying Leo, slowed. She had sensed him. Or maybe she had heard the splash. She stopped 20 feet away, her body suspended in the water column, her tail flukes moving with hypnotic slowness. Leo was still balanced on her back, his head lolling dangerously close to the waterline. The other whales fanned out. T-142, the massive male, broke off from the flank and dove deep. Mick lost visual on the male. That was the worst part. A 6-ton predator you can see is scary. A 6-ton predator you can't see is a phantom. Easy, Mick whispered into his mask, though no one could hear him. Just hand him over. He began to swim slowly toward the female. He used a rhythmic, non-aggressive breaststroke, keeping his head above water to maintain eye contact with the whale's dorsal fin. The female watched him. She rotated her body slightly, presenting her side, shielding the boy. She wasn't fleeing, but she wasn't submitting. She was assessing. From the deck of the Lady J, Sarah Miller screamed, "He's in the water. He's going to get him." Going to get him. David was gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. "Don't scare them," he muttered. "Please, God, don't scare them." Mick was 10 feet away now. He could hear the whale breathing a wet, explosive exhalation that sprayed mist into the air. He could smell her a pungent, fishy musk that clung to the surface of the water. He could see the individual scratches on her saddle patch. "Hey, Mama," Mick said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm just here for the little one. You've done a good job. You've done a great job." He reached out a hand. The water beneath him boiled. Mick jerked his legs up, curling into a ball, expecting the jaws of the male to close around his torso. But it wasn't an attack. T-142 surfaced directly between Mick and the female. He rose vertically, executing a spy hop, lifting his massive head 6 feet out of the water. He towered over the swimmer, a black monolith blocking the path to the child. The whale's eye, dark and intelligent, looked down at Mick. It was a standoff, species to species. The apex predator of the land facing the apex predator of the sea, separated by a few feet of churning water. "Pilot." Mick yelled into his radio, treading water frantically to back away from the towering male. "I'm blocked." "The male is blocking me," "We see him, Mick," the pilot's voice crackled. "Stand by. We're going to try to push him with the rotowash." "No!" Mick screamed. "Don't! If you spook him, he'll thrash. He'll kill the kid by accident. Let me work." Mick stopped moving. He stopped trying to go around the male. He simply floated, arms outspread, palms up. Surrender. He was telling the whale, "I am not a threat. I am not a rival. I am helpless." T-142 held the spy hop for 10 agonizing seconds. He seemed to be weighing the soul of the man in the water. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he sank back beneath the surface. He didn't disappear. He moved to the side. He opened the gate. Mick didn't hesitate. He swam past the lingering currents of the male's wake and reached the female. She had remained stationary, watching the exchange. As Mick approached her flank, he expected her to shy away, to dip and dump the boy. But she stayed rock solid. She was bracing herself against the swell. Mick reached up and grabbed the handle of Leo's life vest. His hand brushed the whale's skin. It felt like wet rubber, hard and unyielding. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity through him. He was touching a wild orca. "I got you, buddy," Mick grunted, pulling. Leo was heavy, dead weight. His skin was blue-gray. His lips were purple. Foam crusted the corners of his mouth. Mick yanked him off the whale's back and pulled him into the water, immediately cradle-holding him to keep his face up. The moment Leo left the whale's back, the dynamic changed. The bond was broken. The female exhaled sharply, a sound that sounded almost like a sigh, and sounded. She dove. One by one, the other fins slipped beneath the surface. They didn't leave, but they retreated to the depth, leaving Mick alone in the freezing ocean with a lifeless child. "I have the package," Mick yelled, his voice cracking. "He is unresponsive." "Repeat, unresponsive. Get the basket down. Now." The helicopter moved in, the noise becoming a physical weight. The water whipped into a frenzy around them. Mick shielded Leo's face from the spray with his own body. He checked for breath. Nothing. He checked for a pulse at the carotid. It was faint, thready, barely there. The cold had shut the boy down. He was in metabolic ice lock. "Come on, Leo," Mick growled, struggling to clip the hoist hook onto the basket that was descending toward them. "Don't you quit on me. You didn't survive a whale ride to die in my arms." The basket hit the water. Mick wrestled Leo into it, strapping him down with numb, clumsy fingers. He gave the thumbs-up signal to the flight mechanic. The cable went taut. Leo rose from the water, dripping, swinging slightly in the wind. Mick watched him go up. He stayed in the water, waiting for the hoist to come back down for him. And as he treaded water, waiting, he felt it. A pressure wave. He looked down. 10 feet below him, 5 pale shapes were circling. They were watching. They were escorting the rescue to the very end. They hadn't abandoned the boy. They had handed him off. Up on the helicopter, the scene was controlled chaos. The flight mechanic pulled the basket inside and immediately began CPR. "No pulse," the mechanic shouted. "Starting compressions." David and Sarah Miller, watching from the boat 200 yards away, saw the basket disappear into the belly of the orange machine. They saw the helicopter bank sharply and turn toward the mainland, the engine pitch changing as it accelerated for maximum speed. They were left behind. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The Lady J bobbed in the empty water. The fog was closing in again. Did they? Is he ... double quotes. Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. David stared at the retreating helicopter, a vanishing dot in the gray sky. "They have him," he said, his voice hollow. "The Coast Guard has him. But is he alive?" Sarah screamed, grabbing his collar. "Is he alive, David?" He didn't have an answer. He looked at the water. The whales were gone. The surface was glassy, unmarked, as if nothing had happened. The ocean keeps its secrets well. We have to follow, David said, moving to the helm. We have to get to the hospital in Bellingham. That's where they'll take him. He engaged the engine. But before he could turn the boat, a sound stopped him. A blow. Off the port side, 30 yards away, T-142 surfaced. He didn't look at the boat. He was facing the direction the helicopter had flown. He took 3 long breaths, filling his massive lungs, and then, slowly, majestically, he raised his tail flukes high into the air. Water cascaded off the black trailing edge. It was a terminal dive. He was going deep. He slipped under without a splash. The Miller family was alone. Back in the helicopter, the battle for Leo's life was being fought on a swaying metal floor. Mick, who had been hoisted up moments after the boy, was shivering in the corner, stripping off his hood, watching the mechanic work. "Come on, kid," the mechanic grunted, pressing down on the small chest. "Come on." Leo was cold. Not just surface cold core cold. His body temperature had likely dropped below 80 degrees. At that temperature, the heart stops beating effectively. It flutters. It gives up. "I'm not getting anything," the mechanic said, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the chill in the cabin. "We need an AED, but he's too wet and too cold. We have to warm him up. How far out are we?" Mick asked, wrapping a wool blanket around his own shoulders. 10 minutes to St. Joseph's, the pilot called back. "I'm redlining the engines." "We're doing everything we can." Mick crawled over to the basket. He put his hand on Leo's forehead. It felt like marble. He looked at the boy's face. It was peaceful, strangely unblemished. There were no bite marks, no bruises from the rough skin of the whales. They had been gentle. They had been impossibly gentle. Why? The question nagged at Mick even as he rubbed Leo's arms, trying to generate friction heat. Why would a transient pod, a group of mammal-eating killers that tore porpoises in half for fun, save a human child? It went against every biological imperative. It wasn't just curiosity. It was intervention. "He's gasping," the mechanic shouted. Mick looked down. Leo's chest hitched. It wasn't a breath, not really. It was an agonal gaspa brainstem reflex. It was the body's last, desperate attempt to restart the machine. "Keep going," Mick yelled. "Don't stop." The helicopter tore through the sky, a mechanical angel carrying a frozen soul, racing against the inevitable physics of death. Down below, the Lady J pounded through the waves, a father driving with reckless desperation, a mother praying to a god she wasn't sure was listening, and behind them, the ocean settled into its ancient, indifferent rhythm. But the story wasn't over, because as the helicopter crossed the shoreline, crossing from the domain of the sea to the domain of men, something shifted in the atmosphere. The fog that had plagued the rescue suddenly broke. The sun shattered through, illuminating the city of Bellingham ahead. And deep in the Haro Strait, the pod of whales did not disperse. They did not resume their hunt. They turned. As a unit, as a single mind, they turned east, toward the land, toward the boy. Scientists would later analyze the GPS tracks of the tagged female in the group. They would stare at the data in disbelief. Because for the next 6 hours, the whales didn't act like animals foraging for food. They acted like a vigil. They swam to the very edge of the deep water, lining up along the drop-off closest to the city, and they waited. They waited for a signal that no human instrument could detect. In the trauma bay of St. Joseph's Hospital, the doors burst open. A team of doctors and nurses in blue scrubs swarmed the gurney. Male, 6 years old, severe hypothermia, drowning, cardiac arrest duration unknown. The paramedics shouted, running alongside the bed. "CPR in progress for 15 minutes. Get him to Bay 1. The trauma-led Dr. Aries Thorne commanded. "Prepare for ECMO. We need to warm his blood from the inside out. Let's move, people. We are not losing this child today." They transferred Leo onto the trauma bed. His small body looked lost in the tangle of wires and tubes. They cut away the wet clothes, the orange vest, the soggy jeans, the Spider-Man t-shirt. Dr. Thorne placed the paddles of the defibrillator on the small, pale chest. Clear, the body jerked. The monitor showed a flat line. Again, charged to 50 joules. Clear, nothing. Sarah and David Miller were still 20 minutes away, docking their boat at the marina, running toward a taxi, their phones ringing unanswered. They didn't know that their son was lying on a table, dead by all clinical definitions, while a team of strangers fought to reverse the cold. And they didn't know that miles away, in the dark water, T-142 was sounding again, sending a low-frequency thrum through the water that vibrated against the pilings of the pier, a sound that felt less like a call and more like a demand. The boy had been theirs. They had given him back. And now, the balance of the exchange was hanging by a thread. The waiting room of an ICU is a purgatory designed in beige and fluorescent light. It smells of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sensory vacuum where time doesn't pass linearly. It loops and stutters. Sarah and David Miller sat in plastic chairs that were bolted to the floor, as if the hospital anticipated that grief might make people want to throw furniture. They were still damp. Sarah's hair was matted with salt. David's shirt clung to his back. They shivered, not from the air conditioning, but from the shock that was slowly unspooling in their veins. They had been there for 3 hours. No one had come out. The last thing they had been told was, "We are working on him." That was it. A phrase that could mean anything from "he see," breathing to, "We are trying to find a heartbeat that isn't there." "David," Sarah whispered. She didn't look at him. She stared at a poster on the opposite wall about heart health. "Did you see the whale's eye?" David blinked, pulling himself out of a trance. "What?" "The big one. When he looked at us. He didn't look like an animal. He looked ... angry. No, not angry. Intentional." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He looked like he was judging us." David took her hand. His palm was rough and cold. "They saved him, Sarah. If they wanted to hurt him, they would have. They saved him." "But why?" She turned to him, her eyes red-rimmed and frantic. "Why did they give him back? And why does it feel like we owe them something now?" Before David could answer, the double doors swung open. Dr. Aries Thorne stepped out. She looked exhausted. Her scrub cap was slightly askew, and there was a smear of something dark on her sleeve. She scanned the room, locked eyes with the Millers, and walked straight toward them. David stood up so fast his chair clattered. Sarah couldn't move. She just watched the doctor's face, searching for the micro-expressions that would deliver the verdict before the words did. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller?" Dr. Thorne asked, though she knew. "Yes," David choked out. "Is he?" "Leo is alive," Dr. Thorne said. Sarah let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, burying her face in her hands. David slumped against the wall, closing his eyes. "But," the doctor continued, her voice steady and serious, "he is in critical condition. We have him on ECMO extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Essentially, a machine is pumping and warming his blood for him because his heart and lungs are too weak to do it on their own. He was profoundly hypothermic. His core temperature was 68 degrees when he arrived. That is usually fatal." "Usually?" David asked, opening his eyes. "Children are resilient," Thorne said, and the cold, strangely enough, protected his brain. It slowed his metabolism down so much that his cells didn't die from lack of oxygen as quickly as they would have in warm water. We call it the metabolic icebox effect. But he's not out of the woods. He's in a coma. We don't know the extent of the neurological damage yet. We won't know until he wakes up. If he wakes up. Can we see him?" Sarah pleaded. "Briefly. He's very fragile." No loud noises. No touching the equipment. They followed her down the hall, past rooms where other tragedies were unfolding in hushed tones. Room 4 was dim. The only light came from the bank of monitors that surrounded the small bed like a technological fortress. The sound was a rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator and the hum of the blood warmer. Leo looked tiny. He was buried under a blanket of warming air, tube snakes down his throat and into his neck. His skin was no longer blue. It was a flushed, unnatural pink as the blood rushed back into his capillaries. Sarah walked to the bedside and hovered her hand over his face, afraid to touch him. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's here. Daddy's here. You're safe." David stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the monitor. He watched the green line of the heart rate. Beep, dot, 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 beep, dot, dot, beep. It was steady. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Doctor," David said quietly, not taking his eyes off the screen. "The people who brought him in, the helicopter crew, did they say anything about dot, 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 how they found him?" Dr. Thorne hesitated. She looked at her chart, then at the parents. "The report says he was recovered from the water." The rescue swimmer noted that he was dot, dot supported. She chose the word carefully. Supported by marine life. "They were holding him up," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "A female orca. She was holding him up so he wouldn't drown." Dr. Thorne's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I see. Well, that is dot, dot extraordinary. I've heard stories, legends mostly. But medically speaking, whatever kept him out of the water saved his life. If he had been fully submerged for that long, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She checked a drip bag, then turned to leave. "I'll give you a few minutes. A nurse will be right outside." Left alone in the room, the silence of the machines took over. But it wasn't just the machines. There was a heaviness in the air, a pressure. David walked to the window. It looked out over the city toward the bay. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the water. He couldn't see the ocean from here, but he could feel it. He felt a strange pull, a magnetism that made the hair on his arms stand up. "He's going to be okay," David said, trying to convince himself. "He's a fighter." Sarah stroked Leo's hair. "He smells like the ocean," she whispered. "Even after they washed him, he still smells like salt." Suddenly, the heart monitor began to beep faster. Beep, 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 beep. Sarah jumped back. "David, what's happening?" David rushed to the side. The numbers were climbing. 120, 130, 140. Leo's eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched against the sheet. He wasn't waking up, not fully, but he was agitated. He was reacting to something. "Nurse!" Sarah yelled toward the door. A nurse rushed in, checking the lines. "His heart rate is spiking. Is he in pain? Did you touch him?" "We didn't touch anything," David said. He just started dot, dot, double quotes. Then, a sound cut through the room. It didn't come from the machines. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from the window. It was faint, muffled by the double pane glass and the city noise, but unmistakable to anyone who had spent time on the water. It was a high-pitched, mournful squeal. A whistle. David froze. He looked at the window. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." "What?" Sarah asked, terrified. "What is it?" "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The whistle. The whale." "David, we're 3 miles from the harbor. You're imagining things." "You're in shock." "I'm not," he insisted. He went to the window and pressed his forehead against the glass. The streetlights were flickering on. The city was busy. But beyond the noise of traffic, he felt a vibration. It was a low-frequency rumble that he felt in his chest more than he heard in his ears. And in the bed, Leo calmed down. As the vibration faded, his heart rate dropped. 130, 110, 90. The green line smoothed out. His hand relaxed. The nurse looked at the monitor, confused. "He's stabilizing." That was dot, dot, dot odd. It looked like a panic response, but then he just dot, dot settled. David turned away from the window, his face pale. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew. They are still here. The next 48 hours were a blur of media frenzy and medical waiting games. The story had broken. Miracle in the Salish Sea. Boy saved by killer whales was the headline on every news ticker from Seattle to New York. The Coast Guard footage grainy. Shaky video taken from the helicopter showing the orange vest on the black back of the whale went viral instantly. It had 50 million views in a day. Marine biologists were losing their minds. They were on every talk show debating the behavior. Some called it altruism, a sign of higher empathy in cetaceans. Others called it misdirected maternal instinct, suggesting the female whale had lost a calf recently and was using the boy as a surrogate. The darker theories that the whales were catching the boy for later, like prey, were whispered in forums but kept off the morning news. But inside the hospital room, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Leo wasn't waking up. They had taken him off the ECMO machine. His heart was beating on its own. His lungs were clearing, but his consciousness remained submerged. He was in a deep stupor, responding only to painful stimuli, and even then, barely. On the third night, David was alone in the room. Sarah had gone to the cafeteria to force down a sandwich. The room was dark, lit only by the monitors. David sat by the bed, holding Leo's hand. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "You have to come back. The boat is waiting. We'll go fishing. I promise, no more deep water. We'll stick to the lakes. Just wake up." Leo's eyes opened. David stopped breathing. "Leo?" The boy's eyes were wide, the pupils blown. He wasn't looking at David. He was looking at the ceiling, or rather through the ceiling. He wasn't blinking. "Leo, can you hear me?" "It's Dad." Leo's lips moved. His voice was a rasp, dry and weak, barely a whisper. "They're waiting," Leo said. David leaned in close. Who's waiting?" "The black ones," Leo whispered. "The family." A chill went down David's spine that had nothing to do with the hospital air. "You mean the whales?" "Leo, you're safe now. You're in the hospital." Leo turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto David's. There was something in that gaze that didn't belong to a 6-year-old boy. It was old. It was deep. It was heavy with a knowledge that shouldn't exist in a human mind. "They didn't want to let me go," Leo said. "She wanted to keep me. She said I was ... small." "She?" David asked, his voice shaking. "The whale?" "The mother," Leo corrected. "She sings. It's loud. It hurts, but it's pretty. She showed me the dark place." "The bottom." David gripped the bed rail. "Leo, you were asleep. You were dreaming." "No," Leo said firmly. "I wasn't asleep. I was with them. We went down. It was cold, but she made it warm. She put me on her back. She told me to hold on. She said the water is hungry." Leo closed his eyes again, exhausted by the effort. "Is she here?" "Who?" "The mother. Is she here?" "I can hear her." David stood up and backed away from the bed. He felt like an intruder in the room. This wasn't just trauma. This wasn't just a hallucination. His son had been in the water for 20 minutes, surrounded by creatures with brains, larger and more complex than humans, creatures that have language, culture, and memory. And something had passed between them. The door opened and Sarah walked in, looking hopeful. "I saw a nurse. She said his vitals look good." "Is he awake?" David turned to her, his face ashen. He woke up. He spoke. "Oh my God, what did he say?" She rushed to the bed. "He said ... double quotes." David hesitated. "He asked for the whale. He said he can hear her." Sarah stopped. She looked at Leo, then at David. "He's traumatized, David. He's confused." "Is he?" David walked to the window again. "Sarah, look at the news." He pointed to the small TV mounted in the corner, which had been muted on a 24-hour news channel. The crawler at the bottom of the screen was red. Breaking news. Orcapod refuses to leave Bellingham Bay. Ferry traffic halted. The footage showed the bay, just a few miles from the hospital. The water was dotted with boats, police boats, research vessels, news crews. And in the center of the flotilla, 4 black fins were cutting through the water. They were swimming in a tight circle. They weren't eating. They weren't moving on. They were holding station. Sarah stared at the screen. "Why?" she whispered. "They're waiting for him," David said. Leo was right. They're waiting. The next day, the situation escalated. The presence of the transient Orcas in the shallow, busy harbor was unprecedented. These were deep-water hunters. Being this close to shore, and the noise and pollution of the city, was stressing them. Biologists were panicked that the whales might beach themselves. The Port Authority wanted to use sound cannons to drive them away, fearing a collision with the freighter. But the public outcry was massive. People were lining the shore with signs. "Let them stay. They saved him. Guardians." Dr. Thorne called a meeting with the Millers. "Leo is physically recovering remarkably fast," she said. "His blood work is normal. His heart is strong, but he is agitated. He's not sleeping. His cortisol levels are through the roof. And he keeps asking to go to the water." "He's 6, Sarah said defensively. "He just wants to go home." "He doesn't want to go home, Mrs. Miller," Thorne said gently. "He wants to go to the bay. He told the nurse that his friends are calling. We need to manage this. The stress is hindering his neurological recovery. We need to calm him down." "How?" David asked. "Sedatives? We've tried. He fights them. It's like his body is hyper-alert." David looked at his wife. He took a deep breath. I think he needs to see them." "What?" Sarah and Dr. Thorne said in unison. "I think he needs to see the whales. Maybe if he sees they're okay, or, I don't know, maybe it's closure. Maybe he needs to say goodbye." "That is absolutely out of the question," Dr. Thorne said. "He is in the ICU. We cannot take a patient in his condition to a marina." "Then bring the ocean to him," David said. "Is there a balcony? A view? Anything?" Dr. Thorne paused. "There is a sunroom on the 4th floor. It overlooks the bay. But he's on oxygen. Portable tank," David said. "Wheelchair. Please, doctor, look at him. He's haunting his own body. We need to break the spell." It took 2 hours of bureaucratic wrangling, but eventually they moved Leo. He was wrapped in 3 blankets, an oxygen cannula in his nose, seated in a high-back wheelchair. David pushed him. Sarah walked alongside, holding the IV bag. They took the elevator up. The sunroom was empty, a glass-walled atrium filled with dying potted plants and old magazines. But the view was clear. The gray expanse of Bellingham Bay stretched out before them, choppy and cold. David wheeled Leo to the glass. "Leo," David said softly. "Look." Leo lifted his head. His eyes scanned the water. For a long moment, nothing happened. The boy just stared, his face blank. Then, out in the harbor, a mile away, a spout of mist shot up, then another. The black shapes were visible even from this distance, breaking the surface. Leo's breath hitched. He leaned forward, pressing his small hands against the glass. "They're there," Leo whispered. A smile broke across his face, the first real smile in 4 days. It was a smile of recognition, of reunion. "Mama," he said. And then something impossible happened. Leo closed his eyes and hummed. It wasn't a tune. It was a high-pitched, sliding note, a mimicry of the sound David had heard in the room. A whistle. E-E-E. It was quiet, coming from a 6-year-old throat, but the pitch was perfect. Out in the bay, the whales reacted. Obviously, they couldn't hear a boy in a glass tower a mile away. The physics of sound didn't work that way. And yet, the timing was synchronized. The moment Leo hummed, the large female, the one who had carried him, breached. She launched her entire 6-ton body out of the water, a massive black missile against the skyline, and crashed down with a splash that sent white water flying for yards. It was a display of power, a signal. Leo opened his eyes. "She says goodbye," he said softly. "She says goodbye?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," Leo said. He slumped back in the chair, the energy suddenly draining out of him. "She says I have to stay here. I can't go to the deep place. Not yet." He looked at his parents. The ancient look was fading from his eyes, replaced by the confusion and fatigue of a regular child. "Mom, I'm tired." "I know, baby," Sarah sobbed, hugging him. "I know." Out in the bay, the whales formed up. They lined up in a row, facing the city, facing the hospital. They lingered for one more minute, 4 black sentinels acknowledging a life returned. Then, the male, T-142, slapped his tail once. The female turned. They dove. This time, they didn't resurface in the harbor. They didn't resurface in the channel. They were gone. They were heading back to the open ocean, back to the deep, dark trenches where they belonged. Leo fell asleep in the chair before they even made it back to the elevator. His heart rate was normal. His breathing was steady. The fever had broken. The Millers took their son back to his room. The crisis was over. The media vans started packing up. The scientists went back to their labs to write papers about aberrant rescue behavior. The world started to turn again. About aberrant rescue behavior. The world started to turn again. But the story wasn't quite done. Because the ocean leaves a mark. And when you stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares back and blinks, you are never quite the same. Recovery, but he was different. It wasn't something he didn't talk about the whales. When asked by therapists, by curious relatives, by kids at school, he would shrug. "I fell in," he would say. "They caught me. That was it." He refused to elaborate. He refused to sensationalize his own miracle. It was as if he held the memory in a private, sacred vault, a secret pact between him and the deep. The scientists, however, could not let it go. 6 months later, a package arrived at the Miller's house. It was from the Center for Whale Research. Inside was a thick report and a handwritten letter from Dr. Aries Thorne, who had kept in touch with the marine biologists. "David, Sarah," the letter read, "I thought you should see this. We've been tracking the T-142 pods since that day. Their behavior has changed. They haven't hunted in their usual grounds. They've been staying closer to the coast, patrolling the same stretch of water where Leo fell in. But that's not the strangest part. We analyzed the hydrophone recordings from the day of the rescue. We found something." David sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the acoustic spectrograms, colorful visual representations of sound. He didn't know how to read them, but the summary was clear. The vocalizations made by the female orca, T-142b, during the 20 minutes she supported, Leo, do not match any known dialect of the transient population. They are not hunting calls. They are not social calls. They are entirely unique. One sequence, repeated 3 times, bears a structural resemblance to the signature whistles used by bottlenose dolphins to identify individuals' names. We believe she wasn't just calling to the pod. We believe she was naming him. David stared at the paper, naming him. He looked out the sliding glass door to the backyard. Leo was there. It was raining, a typical Seattle drizzle. Leo wasn't running inside. He was standing in the grass, his face upturned to the sky, letting the water run down his cheeks. He looked peaceful. He looked at home in the wet gray world. "Leo," David called out, a sudden irrational fear gripping him. Leo turned. He smiled. "Yeah, Dad? Come inside. You'll catch a cold." Leo laughed a bright, normal sound. "I don't get cold anymore, Dad. You know that." He didn't. That was the other thing. Leo never wore a coat. He never shivered. The cold that had almost killed him seemed to have inoculated him, as if the hypothermia had rewritten his thermal regulation. David watched his son run back to the house, and he realized that the rescue hadn't been a one-way transaction. The whales hadn't just given Leo back. They had kept a piece of him, and they had given him a piece of them. The ocean is not a void. It is a presence. We treat it like a backdrop, a resource, a place to dump our trash and float our boats. We forget that it is watching us. We forget that it is older than us, stronger than us, and deeper than we can comprehend. On that day in August, the veil between our world and theirs thinned. A child fell through, and for 20 minutes, the apex predators of the sea suspended their nature to protect him. They formed a circle. They held the line. They defied their own biology to save a clumsy, fragile land mammal. Why? Maybe it was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of instinct. Or maybe, just maybe, they recognized something. Maybe they saw a young life and, in a flash of cross-species empathy that shone as our own divided humanity, decided that today there would be no death. But there is a cost to staring into the eyes of a killer whale and seeing mercy. The cost is knowing how small you are. The cost is knowing that we exist at their pleasure. The Miller family doesn't go boating anymore. They sold the Lady J. They moved inland to a house near the mountains. But every year, on the anniversary, they drive to the coast. They stand on the bluff overlooking the Salish Sea. They bring binoculars. And every year, without fail, they see them. 4 black fins cutting the water, pausing just offshore, waiting, acknowledging Leo waves. And sometimes, if the wind is right, they hear a blow, a sound like a pressurized sigh. We are here. We remember. The ocean gives, and the ocean takes. But sometimes, in the rare magical margins of the world, the ocean simply holds. This story is a reminder that we share this planet with intelligences we are only just beginning to understand. It is a reminder that the line between predator and protector is not always clear. And it is a warning. Do not underestimate the deep, respect it, fear it, and be grateful for the mysteries it chooses to reveal. If this story chilled you, moved you, or made you look at the water a little differently, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We have more stories from the edge of the wild coming soon. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, don't look away.